Okay, so today we have Mary Trump, clinical psychologist, author of the new book, Too Much and Never Enough, and the niece of Donald Trump. Mary, thanks so much for coming on.
Oh, it's great to be here, Brian.
So obviously, where would we begin other than with the fact that Donald Trump tested positive for coronavirus? So I'd like to hear your thoughts on this, but generally speaking, could there be a more damning indictment of his reckless behavior than contracting the very virus that he's been downplaying with 30 days to go before the election?
Well, it's certainly up there with the in excess of 200,000 people dead who shouldn't be because he didn't take this virus seriously.
Right.
This is a really dark moment. Not because this was inevitable, because it was. I'm a little surprised by how many people are surprised. To me, the only shocking thing was that it took so long for somebody in his inner circle or him to contract the virus, considering how incredibly irresponsible they've been. But that's their problem, right? They're adults. If they want to choose, I understand why Donald does what he does, but if the people in his inner circle feel that it's more important to prop up his ego and lie for him and put their own lives at risk, what are you going to do? That's entirely their problem. What's our problem, however, is the countless numbers of people they have endangered through this willful recklessness. We can no longer say that this is unfortunate, that this is a mistake, that this was careless, or that people died because of inaction. This is willful at this point. And from everything I'm hearing, it sounds like this was covered up. And man, there had better be some major accountability coming.
Building on that, I know that people are focused on Donald, but really the only people I'm thinking about right now are the people whose lives were shattered because of a virus that the president failed to contain. The fact is that Trump had the luxury of the science being right in front of him. He has the luxury of top public health experts. He has the luxury of living inside the world's safest bubble. That he got it anyway was the result of his own recklessness, but just about everyone else didn't have that luxury. Lives were lost because people believed him when he downplayed it. People believed him when he talked about injecting disinfectant and a vaccine being ready in 2 weeks, and that masks didn't help, and that you should go back to work and school and his rallies. I'm reserving my sympathy for the people who were impacted through no fault of their own.
As am I. There's only one small thing I would change. He didn't fail. He succeeded in doing what he wanted to do, which was downplay the virus, pretend it wasn't an issue, and convince his followers to listen to him and nobody else. So, obviously, I have very different beliefs from most of the people who still support Donald. But you can't blame them for listening to the person they voted for and who runs the country. And I also think about the countless numbers of people who work in the White House as housekeepers, as secretaries, as waiters, as Secret Service. I think about just the breathtaking and criminal willfulness here. And the other thing, too, is, we don't know how sick he is or if he's even going to get very sick. But in the event that happens, he has at his disposal the absolute best healthcare on this planet. And he's trying to take it away from everybody else in this country. In the debate, he clearly doesn't know what he's talking about. When Joe Biden said that there are 100 million people in this country with pre-existing conditions, Donald contradicted him. So he doesn't even know what he's talking about. So, sorry, I'm rambling. I'm angry.
No, I think that's justified. The irony of this is that the Republicans who've contracted this virus thus far, it's Donald and Melania, Hope Hicks, Mike Lee, Ronna McDaniel Romney, they all contracted this virus at an event celebrating the nomination of a Supreme Court Justice, Amy Coney Barrett, who would strike down the ACA, the only law protecting 20 million Americans' health coverage during the very pandemic that they themselves fell victim to. There couldn't be a more karmic response than what we're seeing right now.
Yeah, with the exception of all of the innocent people who are going to get sick, and some of them are going to die because of their just cynicism and callousness and arrogance, quite frankly, because these people know they're not idiots. They understand science. You know, Amy Coney Barrett, she understands science. Mike Lee, well, I'm not sure about Mike Lee, but they understand how viruses work. So, what is going on that they are so willing to put themselves at risk? Because clearly they don't care about anybody else, but do they not care about themselves? It's astonishing.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, so let's jump over to the debates. This was alluded to at the debate and a number of times prior. So when asked if he'd concede the race if he lost, Donald Trump basically signaled that he won't. He says he'd concede so long as it's fair, but he's already saying it's not fair. So based on what you know about him, would Donald Trump concede if he loses the race?
He most likely wouldn't, but my what I would say about that is, who cares? It's not up to him. He doesn't decide the election. So, you know, if he wants to have a temper tantrum about it, that's his problem. It doesn't change the fact that he has to get himself and his family out of the White House on January 20th. That's not what worries me. What worries me is what you just alluded to, that he's already cheating by saying things like it's rigged, mail-in voting is a fraud, even though it's exactly the same thing as absentee voting. He's cheating by undermining the efficiency of the post office by putting hacks like Louis DeJoy in place. And he's cheating by, you know, accusing Vice President Biden of rigging an election that, you know, he pretty much doesn't have anything to do with. So along with Chris Wallace, Donald seems to be convinced that Joe Biden is currently the president, which would be great, by the way, but it's not true.
So, you know, going further into that debate, it basically devolved into what the entire country agreed was, and I'll use the legal term here, a dumpster fire. So what we saw from Donald Trump was someone incapable of controlling himself. You know, there was a physical incapability to not say words and interrupt and bark at anyone within earshot. So, you know, afterwards we heard a lot of journalists and pundits talking about whether his strategy worked. Is what we saw from Donald Trump a strategy, or is it him just being a belligerent Donald Trump with zero thought to anything beyond just, you know, impulsive reactionism?
I continue to be amazed that anybody gives him credit for being a strategic thinker or a thinker of any kind. Yeah. I mean, what I would say is that Donald knew going into this debate, even before the New York Times article hit, that he could not allow it to be about policy or anything of substance, because he has not, his record is horrible across the board. So that's why he used the tactic of interrupting and changing the subject and attacking Vice President Biden and his family. Because in addition to everything else, Donald's also a hypocrite. So the New York Times story, however, changed the calculus a little bit. Well, actually, let me rephrase that, because that suggests that there was thoughtful preparation. The New York Times story freaked him out so badly that he couldn't manage his chosen tactic, and, as you said, just devolved into this, you know, flame-throwing, pouting. It was embarrassing for him, but it was demeaning to the rest of the country, and it felt abusive to me.
Yeah, exactly. That's a really good way to put it, and I haven't heard it put that way before. I do want to touch on something that you brought up, and that is the attacks on Joe Biden, the personal attacks on Joe Biden. So, you know, there was a point where Joe gave a really heartfelt tribute to his late son, Beau, and Donald Trump's response was, well, I don't know Beau, but Hunter is a coke addict who was kicked out of the military. So Donald Trump ran on this idea that he was greedy, but he's going to be greedy for all Americans. You know, that you know, that he's an asshole, sure, but he's going to be our asshole for all Americans. That whatever unseemly traits that he had, Americans may not like it, but hey, now you can use them, you know, to your advantage. But what happened in the debate, what we saw was just evil with no upside, like a dismissal of the death of someone's son. It was mocking addiction, which countless Americans and their families have to deal with, especially with the opioid epidemic. So this isn't him just, this isn't a matter of him having bad qualities, but hey, at least it'll benefit us. This is him having bad qualities that are just disgusting with no upside. So do you think people will be able to recognize that in his performance in this debate? Like, will the curtain be lifted for people who realize that we actually derive no benefit from this?
If they should. Yeah, of
Yeah.
course they should. Will they? I don't know. We're going to spend a very long time if we survive this, figuring out what went wrong with a significant minority of people in this country. Um, yeah, there's so much. There was so much going on that I was like most people, quite despairing after the debate because it was demoralizing and painful. But David Corn wrote an article on Mother Jones that made a very good point, and he wrote that it may seem like we didn't get any information out of the debate, but we did. We got to know who Joe Biden is and how he handles, relentless personal attacks, and we got to see exactly who Donald is. And that's why, for me, the most, I don't want to say important, but the most revelatory exchange in the debate was the one you just mentioned. Obviously, the white supremacy thing is incredibly dangerous and disqualifying. The stuff about the election is dangerous and disqualifying. But on a personal level, that just showed how Donald Trump should not be allowed anywhere in polite society or anywhere outside of a prison. I mean, it just showed the man's character or lack thereof. And he also mocked people who go to state colleges. And the addiction thing was obviously personally pretty hard for me to take because my dad was an alcoholic and died at the age of 42. So the fact that Vice President Biden was able to pull himself together and not fling himself across the stage and, give Donald what he deserved was shocking to me. I could never have done it. But that he pivoted to talk about how Hunter had dealt with his problem and that he was proud and was in recovery and that Joe was proud of him made me think, what would have happened if my dad had had a father like that, and how devastating and cruel that instead he had a brother like Donald.
Donald Trump's whole shtick, and I think he tried to I think the point of that exchange was to show that he's strong, right? Like, but so much of what we see is him actually desperately overcompensating for the fact that he's weak, like punching down on people of color and the LGBT community and immigrants and low income folks. These aren't signs of strength. Kowtowing to strongmen like Putin, Erdogan, MBS, Duterte, again, not signs of strength. So would just calling out the fact that he's actually an ineffective, weak person be the most effective attack against him, considering he's predicated his entire persona on trying to convince people of the opposite?
Absolutely. No, you're absolutely right. And I mean, the only slight difference I have with you is that in that exchange, I don't think Donald was trying to be strong. I think he was trying to interrupt a moment that Vice President Biden would have owned, right?
Yeah.
And it was a moment in which he panicked. He went into the debate with 4 talking points / attacks. And one of them was about Hunter. And he just went after it at the most inappropriate moment he could have. If I were debating him, I would use 4 words over and over again: weak, pathetic, ineffectual, incompetent. I would describe every action he's ever taken in those terms. I would describe him personally in those terms. And I would never call him anything but Donald, because he's done more to demean the office he holds than anybody in the history of this country. He does not deserve the respect it affords him.
Really well said. So let's move on to you personally. You have a few days ago, you filed a lawsuit against Donald Trump and his siblings. Could you give a brief overview of the suit? Specifically, there were 3 schemes that they undertook to basically squeeze you out of receiving anything.
Yeah, and what's really fascinating is that it turns out that a lot of the plays they made back in the 90s are very similar to the things this most recent New York Times
Yeah.
report shows them engaging in now, like giving Ivanka enormous consulting fees. My grandfather did that with his three children. I'm sorry, four surviving children. They created a fake corporation to siphon money away from an actual profitable business so that, my aunts and uncles will get this money under the table and not pay taxes on it. So the scam has been the same for a long time. The lawsuit is about how they use that fake corporation in part to siphon money away from properties and a management company I inherited from my dad in 1981, or the half of that, because I have a brother. So by the time my grandfather died and we'd found out we'd been disinherited, um, in order to settle that lawsuit, they needed to buy us out of our share in those entities and fraudulently devalued the properties to such an extent that, I got a tiny fraction of what they were actually worth. But I didn't know that until that brilliant piece in the New York Times that was published in 2018, which also should have ended this nightmare, but apparently
Other
it's going to
things.
take a lot more than one
Yeah.
article. So anyway, I am that's the first time I became aware of what they'd done. And I just want my stolen property returned to me.
There was a moment where Donald Trump and his siblings used the threat of your brother's infant son as leverage. Can you talk about that?
It was pretty simple and effective. We, all of us, had excellent health care through my grandfather's company since birth. All of my aunts and uncles, my parents, all of the grandchildren. So when we had children, our children would also have it, or would be on our policies. And my nephew was very ill when he was an infant, and after we filed this lawsuit about my grandfather's estate, which was about 5 or 6 months after he died, they retaliated by canceling all of our health insurance, even though my nephew still needed run the clock care.
I mean, the fact that they'll use healthcare as a cudgel to squeeze you out of the family business, like it says something about how Donald Trump views healthcare and gives some insight into this situation that we're in right now with this pandemic. Like healthcare is not something that he cares about. It's transactional, right? I mean, and even in a situation now where we've seen 200,000 Americans die, 1,000 Americans dying a day, and the fact that that's still not his priority, kind of, it goes to show that, like you said, I mean, the same strategies that he's used his entire life, he continues to use now, and the same strategies that he's employed to benefit or conversely hurt his family as far back as decades ago, he's still using today in 2020.
Yeah, it's a very disturbing pattern, and it's less that he doesn't care about healthcare. It's that he believes it's a weapon to wield. And he did the same thing with PPE and ventilators at the beginning of COVID. When he said in the debates that even Democratic governors praised him for his handling of COVID-19, that may be true to some extent, but they did it because if they hadn't, he would have withheld the
Right.
necessary equipment that was keeping our first responders alive and was helping keep COVID patients alive, because he has no empathy. He is a petty, selfish, cruel man. And whatever he can use as leverage over somebody he considers an enemy, and by the way, an enemy is anybody who doesn't praise him and think he's the best thing that ever happened and who doesn't support him. He'll do whatever it takes, which is why we need to go into this election with our eyes wide open.
So, and I totally agree. And as soon as I heard him say that, my immediate thoughts go to people like Gavin Newsom, for example. And Gavin Newsom and Donald Trump are diametrically opposed on every issue. There is a reason, though, why Gavin Newsom compliments Trump when he needs to. It's not
Of
because he
course.
likes him, and it's not because he thinks he's effective. It's simply because he knows that the only way to get through to this president, the only way to get federal aid, for example, when we're dealing with wildfires out here in California, is to compliment the guy. I mean, you could, there's a reason that he's friendly with the world's most dangerous autocrats, is because they know how to play him, because
Of
it's not
course.
difficult.
Of course. And it's embarrassing, but it's also deeply dangerous because he's so easy to
Right.
manipulate. And
I mean,
and I write
we have somebody like Vladimir Putin, who's like an ex KGB operative, who if he needed to can manipulate the world's most difficult mind to get into, and instead all he needs to do is tell Donald Trump that that his hair looks good.
yeah, it's that
So,
simple. And it's a testament to how thoroughly my grandfather destroyed yet another one of his sons. Because essentially, what my grandfather did was render Donald eminently useful to smarter, more powerful men. And that's most men to say. So, anybody without a conscience or anybody who's desperate, like Newsom, like Cuomo in New York, when we were suffering so horribly, will do whatever it takes. And in the case of the governors, it's to help save people's lives. In the case of people like Putin and Erdogan and Duterte and Kim Jong Un, et cetera, it's to weaken this country, which has happened at an alarming rate. Thank you, elected Republicans. It's made us less safe, and it's strengthened Russia. And I don't know. I guess I'm not surprised anymore, but it is breathtaking just how many people are willing to enable this and go along for the ride and just watch our country unravel and do nothing to stop it.
so let's speak about the taxes, the New York Times tax story that you spoke about.
Mhm.
The New York Times, revealed that Donald Trump paid $750 in taxes in 2016 and 2017, zero in taxes in 10 of the 15 years prior. They shed light on an audit battle with the IRS over, a disputed $72.9 million tax refund that he claimed. What was your reaction to this? Was this kind of thing common knowledge within the family? Is it closely guarded within the family?
Well, these are all strategies my grandfather's been engaged in since his children were toddlers. He was one of the cheapest people who ever lived. And although the vast bulk of his wealth was based on government funding and government grants, he
Right.
hated paying taxes more than anything. And he passed that down in spades to Donald. So, not surprising, but that article is so important on what I think are three levels. First of all, I don't know who came up with the number $750, but it's an infinitely more effective number than zero, because
Yeah.
people hear zero, they think accounting magic or whatever.
Right.
$750 is an amount of money people can relate to. You know, it's what they have to pay. It's half of their rent, or it's
Yeah.
it's 3 months of a car payment, or whatever the case may
Right.
be. And that really resonated. I think it's the least important part of the story, but if it helps people understand just how craven and cheap Donald is, I think it's a good thing.
Yeah.
The other thing that those numbers show us, which is more important, is how horrible our tax system is. The fact that it's just infuriating, because what the $72.9 million he applied for, because there were a couple of years where he actually made money, which is shocking. That's like really the only shocking thing in the article. So for the first time in a long time, he had to pay taxes, and it was over a 3-year period or anything, something. It was $72.9 million. And then he asked for it back plus interest, and he got it.
Yeah.
Why? So we need to answer that question, but much more importantly, the $400+ million in debt that's coming due in the next 2 to 4 years, that renders Donald the greatest national security threat to this country ever.
Yeah. And that's a really good point. The federal government doesn't grant security clearances to people who have debt for exactly that reason. I mean, depending on who owns that debt when it comes due, can absolutely impact how Donald Trump acts as president. You know what I mean? Like if Russia, for example, owns that debt, Donald Trump might be less inclined to retaliate in the event that they, oh, I don't know, interfered in our election or placed bounties on our soldiers' heads. I mean, this is the kind of behavior we're seeing right now, and these are the questions we need to be asking.
Of course, like why would any person in his position randomly withdraw troops from Germany? Like what tactical advantage is there in that? There is the only advantage is to Russia. So obviously, there's a lot going on behind the scenes, and you're right. It's probably already happening that his debt is being leveraged to get him to behave in particular ways that benefit his debtors. I think it's another instance too of how damaged our system is. The only person in the United States government who does not need to pass a security clearance is the person in the Oval Office. That's insane. I get the point. It's because the American people need to be able to choose. So then I would say candidates have to pass a security clearance, just as candidates have to release their tax returns. And I'm sorry, this stuff needs to be codified because too much can go wrong, as we've seen. Like everything can go wrong.
Yeah. So let's move on to yourself. So completely separating yourself as his niece, what's your professional diagnosis here? And does he believe the lies he tells? Like he says things like he never said the thing about nuking a hurricane. That just happened at the debate. There's literal video footage of it. And he does it on a constant basis where something that happened moments ago or days ago that's on camera that the whole world saw, he says, no, it wasn't me. I mean, does he believe these things when they leave his lips?
First, as far as the diagnosis goes, I can't diagnose him simply because it's a very technical process, and requires data that one can't get from simply observation. However, that having been said, I think at this point, a diagnosis is irrelevant. We need to look at his behavior, which is deeply pathological. He's a deeply psychologically disordered person, and he's harming this country and the people in it every day he's in office. As for his lying, I think it's sort of learned behavior in the sense that, Donald has never been challenged before. Whatever he said, it was printed as fact. I'm talking about the late 70s, 80s, 90s. No pushback, no follow-up. This even happened during the 2016 election, which was infuriating. So he just gets away with saying stuff. And now that's not being allowed to happen to the same degree. Although, of course, there should be much more pushback and follow-up than there is. But when he says something like nuke hurricanes, he's saying that because he doesn't know anything. And then here's the blowback from something like that. And then the next time he's confronted with it, he'll lie and say he never said it because he knows it was a bad thing to say, just as he's now saying that he was being sarcastic when he told people to drink bleach, which he was not being sarcastic because he has no sense of humor and he doesn't understand sarcasm, but somebody told him to clean it up that way, right?
Yeah.
But over time, he actually gaslights himself and does come to believe these things, which is why sometimes he says he lies with such authority because he's not lying anymore. He's literally the only person I know who gaslights himself.
Yeah.
And you can kind of tell if you look at the progression from the original lie, which it's so obvious he's lying and knows he's lying, to when he's like, no, I never said that. He actually, I think, believes it. It's quite dangerous and terrifying.
It's telling too, because a lot of times we ask ourselves when he tells these egregious lies, we say like, who can be dumb enough to fall for this? And apparently the answer is Donald Trump, right?
Yes. Well, yeah. Because, regardless of what his IQ is, I don't know. I don't think he's a particularly bright person. But, he's not a total moron. He is capable at times, if you think about the 2016 debates, he held it together and he, memorized what he needed to memorize.
Yeah.
And he is on occasion able to do that, but he's the least intellectually curious person
Right.
I know. And that presents its own dangers.
Donald Trump as president has become a cloud over all of us. It's impossible to escape from him, because he's so needy and desperate for attention that rarely does a day go by that doesn't where he doesn't impact our lives. And we're just regular people, but you're his niece. So I'm curious what it's like in terms of the dominating force that is Donald Trump on someone who actually shares the same last name as him. Like, what is it like to hear your last name all day, every day?
It's awful. I'm handling it better now, but for the first few months, it was just brutal. I have PTSD, not from anything. It has nothing to do with my family, but I have PTSD. And one of the worst things for me is to feel trapped. So I was feeling very trapped, and hearing my name dozens of times a day because it's my name,
Yeah.
and I've become able to distinguish now between people referring to him because certainly at the time nobody was referring to me, but it took a while to get there, and plus also seeing his face all the time, it was really really difficult. But now it's just deeply unpleasant. And I still do have those moments. It doesn't happen every day like it used to, but I do still have those moments where I just feel this horror that he is in the position he's in, and that so many people thought that that was okay. It's wounding.
Yeah. Well, I can say that, even in what is, to say the least, an unenviable position that you're in, I think you've done a great job, not allowing yourself to be defined by the creeping influence of Donald Trump.
Hasn't been easy, but thank you.
So the last thing, I mean, with regard to you having come out against him so full throatedly, especially with this book, did you receive any threats or anything like that?
No, but I was prepared for them.
Mhm.
And it's a sign of the times that I'm actually shocked that I haven't received any threats, because everybody else does.
Yeah.
So I actually thought that being his niece would make it worse for me. But maybe it protects me. Like maybe even the craziest of his followers aren't willing to cross that line. I'm not really
Yeah.
sure, but I feel quite lucky.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm not letting my guard down, but I
Right.
still feel it's definitely surprising that I'm not getting threats of any kind.
And so, final question is what have you been doing now in the final month and the final push that we have until the election? Where are you focusing your energy?
In the last few weeks, I'm continuing to sound the alarm wherever and whenever I can about Donald's deteriorating mental health and his sickness. He's a very sick man, and people need to understand that. And he's never going to get better, and he's only going to get worse because his psychological disorders are untreated. So there's that. But I'm also doing fundraisers for PACs and candidates from like assembly on up, because I think Democrats need to focus on local races in a way they haven't before. I mean, I think they started to in 2018, which was
Yeah.
really heartening. And we need to continue that trend because unless and until we start taking over state legislatures, statewide races, it's going to be a much longer, harder slog. So that's pretty much, anybody who thinks I could be helpful or be of use in any way, I'm trying to support them.
Great. Well, Mary Trump, thank you so much for taking the time to talk. I really appreciate it.
Thanks so much, Brian.